the rap on blockchain historically has been it's a solution looking for a problem. So a little bit the way you're asking the question is it's a little bit of like there's a solution, go and find the problem. For me, for the entrepreneur thing, don't worry about what the solution is. Find the problems that you're interested in fixing, and then you'll try some solutions and hopefully some of them work, but probably the first few won't work, and then you'll find other solutions that do work. I mean, my story is a little bit unusual because I kind of got lucky in the sense of there was this thing that I was already working on that was really interesting, and then it was just a question of, do I want to, am I going to put the energy in to make it real? I got lucky. I think if you're genuine entrepreneur, where you really know you want to be your own, run your own business and all of that, I think it's much more about find the problem.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today we have with us Rhomaios Ram, who's the CEO of Fnality International. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Amardeep. And so first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on the show. And also, just call me Rhom. Everybody else does.
You had a really successful career in the banking industry, in the corporate world, but you've recently shifted into the more startup space. And then you became the CEO of this company that was very new and is obviously a big risk. What encouraged you to go down that more entrepreneurial route?
What encouraged me to go? To be honest, I'm sort of a bit of an accidental entrepreneur in some ways. So I did have a long career in the corporate world. And by the end of it, I'd sort of grown frustrated. I could see all kinds of new things happening. I was particularly interested in blockchain and how that could basically influence financial markets. And I got frustrated with the institution that I was at. And so I decided to retire. And I thought, when you retire from a company, the main things you're going to do is like maybe you can mentor some people, and maybe some companies would be happy to get some advice and all of this kind of stuff. So I basically started doing that. And as luck would have it, this kind of small consortium of financial institutions had realized that they needed some help. They basically gone away and started doing all kinds of experiments with blockchain. And they realized that one of the key factors on that was around how do they do payments on a blockchain. And so they formed a small consortium to basically figure out how to do it and like what would be the design criteria. And they told me like, hey, would you come and help us? We need somebody one day a week to like, organize some meetings and like, chair the committee and all of this kind of stuff. So I basically went along to do that, thinking this is a bit of a nice gig. I get paid for my one day and so on. Within like 2 or 3 weeks, I was on 2 days a week, and within a month, I was doing it full time, and kind of got hooked on it. After about 18 months, we'd realized that we'd done enough to kind of make it an investable thing, actually make a company out of all of it. And I was describing it the other day. The way I feel about it is, it was kind of one of those situations where you're all in a line, and somebody says, "Okay, anyone that wants to lead it, step forward." Nobody stepped forward, but like a bunch of people stepped back, and I was kind of there. So it's a little bit accidental. I never thought of myself as a CEO, and I never anticipated that I'd be doing it. I mean, I definitely like working with people and helping people do stuff. And I found it actually a quite rewarding experience, I guess, because of that mindset. I'm trying to do it in a slightly different way that's a bit more, we're delivering some blockchain stuff. So my organizational structure is very decentralized, and I like to empower people a lot. It's very flat, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that kind of mindset is seeping into an organization in a way that's really positive.
How is it like to retire, obviously? Because if you were retired, you basically were thinking, okay, I'm now just taking it easy. And then going into something you're doing 5 days a week. Did at any point you're thinking, wait, what am I doing here? Or did it just feel so natural you never really questioned the route you're going in?
I was definitely questioning it, yeah. So the problem was I couldn't retire, like go play golf every day or this type of thing. I mean, I have some hobbies. Golf's not one of them, but like, but I needed something to keep my brain engaged. So I was going to do something, I was thinking advisory or whatever, where, you could offer some help and maybe think through some problems with some people and help, kind of help them. And I really wasn't sure that I wanted to do it. It was like, there is a lot of responsibility as an entrepreneur in terms, I didn't realize quite how big it is, right? So there's an accountability to your shareholders. I mean, not just because, they put the money in and blah, 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 but actually they've trusted you with a whole bunch of money. So you kind of owe that's kind of it's more than just they gave you money. It's like there's something else in that as well. And then the second thing is once you start building the company, we've got, like 100 people or whatever. They didn't all join because of me, but they they kind of join because of this thing, and like, who's the person that's got to look after them? So in some ways, it's like much more than I really wanted to be doing. So there is definitely some questioning in my mind of whether I did the right thing. But anyway, here I am. So,
And like, so when everybody else stepped back and you were the one left in charge, what was going through your head in terms of like your planning? Because obviously, if you said you'd never been a CEO before, what were you expecting about the role, and what's been very different to what you're expecting as well?
well, I had been kind of reasonably senior in my previous role. So, I had a department of like 5,000 people and all that. So I knew the fundamentals of leadership and kind of all of this stuff. And I knew the basics of what you had to do. And for me, philosophically, the place you start is around building a culture. So actually, one of the first, there's obviously some much more nuts and bolts things like having a bank account and getting payroll done and all of that kind of stuff. But in essence, once you start bringing together a group of people, it's like, what kind of culture what's the thing that you want to achieve? And then what kind of culture do you want to use to achieve it? It's kind of the way round that I would say it. So for me, I had kind of a plan in my mind about how you would go about setting it up. And once you decide those things, this is what we want to achieve, and this is the culture we want, then kind of organizational structure and ways of working and all this kind of fall into place off the back of it. So I didn't feel that worried about what do I do next and so on. So the fundamentals of leadership and management, I mean, people know them. People aren't necessarily good at them. And I don't know if I'd even put myself in that category, but you certainly know kind of what needs to be done.
Were there any big differences you find between your role now versus when you were in the corporate space? Because obviously you were leading a huge number of people.
Oh, so basically, yeah. This is what I'm doing now is utterly different to what I did. One of my big observations about the corporate world is that it's not set up, at least the traditional corporate world is not set up to optimize delivery of stuff to clients, right? So it's typically, pretty functionally organized. And that means there's lots of silo boundaries that need to be crossed. And the problem with that is, of course, people forget about, well, not they forget about, but it's very hard to link a user experience across, multiple different departments, etc. And then, of course, planning and execution of stuff becomes harder and harder. So in my current organization, we're much more focused around kind of stakeholder, whichever stakeholder we're aiming at the time, but like basically client needs. So it's a typical sort of agile thing. It's much flatter. People are much more empowered to make decisions at the ground level. We do a number of things centrally that have to be done centrally. So we're big believers in extreme transparency because you need to have the context of why you're doing something and how it relates to something else that somebody else is doing, so that they can kind of join up later on. So we do have meetings around prioritization that are done centrally, so everyone can kind of understand what the right priorities for the company are. And we obviously, it's a smaller company, so we try and people can't have hobbies in the way they can in the corporate world. We need to focus on the things that are outcomes for the company.
And like you mentioned there about like focusing on your clients, can you explain for people what exactly you do for your clients?
Yeah. So what does Fnality do? So the thing that we were solving for was, how do you make payments between traditional financial institutions in a world that's moved to distributed ledger technology? So taking advantage of blockchain and all of that sort of stuff. And so what we're doing is building a new design of payment system, basically, that's based on distributed ledger technology. The special thing about what we're doing that makes it different from like a stable coin is that our coin has if you want to call it that, has the credit quality of central bank money. And so how do we achieve that? We have to open up accounts at the central bank, and then money's deposited in there. And then we basically allow our participants to move that money, that representation of money around. I said it's wholesale. Basically, all of our participants are going to be banks, and actually the owners of the company are basically banks. So it's that's basically what we do. So for anyone that knows anything about that kind of crypto space, there's something out there called central bank digital currency, CBDC. We are effectively a private sector answer to central bank digital currency. So we basically do the same thing.
And how does it work in terms of, is it UK based only, or can it expand globally? How does that side of things work?
Yeah, so the intention is to build a global network. We're starting off in the UK right now, so we're working with the Bank of England, but we also beginning work with the Federal Reserve in the US and the ECB in Europe. Our initial remit is to do those three currencies plus Japan and Canada. And then we have in mind a model that will take us, beyond that. Yeah, once we prove some sort of success with what we're doing doing right now.
So, fun fact for you, I worked at the Bank of England for a year,
Oh,
10
right.
years ago now. So
Right.
I was in the Monetary Policy Committee unit. So I worked with people like Ben Broadbent and
Yeah.
helped them with their speeches and that kind of thing. So what's interesting to me is, how did you convince the Bank of England to take on board this kind of idea? Because obviously historically, and obviously I'm not throwing anyone on the bus here, it's been slow to move, right? If it's a government organization, how do you get them to look at this more modern technology and see what the future is?
Yeah. I mean, so, I've been talking to them as part of this since 2017. So it's been quite a long road, and we still, it's now 2022. And, hopefully we'll get our account opened in 2023. It's been quite a long road to get them to a place where they'd be happy to do it. It's actually, in some ways, it's the main challenge of this startup is, it's kind of our market. Can we persuade the central banks that this is a thing worth doing? And I'm happy to report the answer is yes, but it has been a long road. I'd say there's a couple of things that have happened, two or three things that have happened that allowed us to do this. So the first thing is our owners and our participants are banks, and of course, people like the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve or the ECB, their customers are basically banks. So they will pay attention to you if the banks are coming to them and saying, we want to do this thing, right? So that's definitely made it. I don't think I could be a private startup without that kind of backing. And I'm sure I could get into the Bank of England to talk to them about stuff, but I don't think I would get to the point where that we've gotten to without that kind of consortium of financial institutions behind me. The second thing is, whether you like it or not, the crypto space has kind of grown and grown and grown, and now crashed, but grown and then crashed, and et cetera, et cetera. And the regulators have been eyeing that up for quite some time, wondering how to regulate it, if they should regulate it, et cetera, what that regulation would look like. And so they've been paying attention. So they've been building out their own knowledge of that. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we've definitely been feeding our research into them, which, they've obviously come to their own conclusions. I'd like to think that we've influenced how they think about, stablecoin world and kind of payments in general, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a process of their own research and education and all of this sort of stuff that's helped persuade them. And then I think the thing that really changed the conversation was in 2019, Facebook said it was going to do some sort of stablecoin. And that got got them worried. Somebody big like Facebook that could have billions potentially of users, and like, who's going to regulate it and all of that sort of stuff, kind of changed the dynamic of the conversation from this might happen, it's kind of an intellectual curiosity, to it looks like this is going to happen, and we really need to figure out how we're going to deal with it, etc. And so I guess we've been the beneficiary of a bit of luck and a bit of judgment and hard work.
And like, for yourself as well, what made you get into the blockchain or really believe in the blockchain technology? Because you had that background in traditional finance and derivatives you mentioned. What got you interested in the first place?
So at the time I was starting the sort of retirement process, I was working in an area of the bank called transaction banking. And that area basically resells operational processes. So payments is an operational process. All of the security settlement and kind of custody of securities and all of this type of thing is also kind of an operational process. And around about 2013, we were kind of thinking about, what's going on in the world that we need to consider, et cetera. And I'm not that technical, but I was the most technical of the people on this executive team. I was like, and we were talking about Bitcoin. I was like, let me go and do some research into it and see what I think. I sort of did all that research, and I kind of laugh at what my knowledge was then compared to what it is now. But I was like, wow, this thing can really change like the entirety of banking. So a little bit, I mean, I sort of still believe that, and it's kind of true. I just don't know which area it's going to change in, and I got excited about all of that. So actually, I spent the next couple of years trying to persuade my institution to do all kinds of proof of concepts, and finally got convinced that this is the right thing to do, but couldn't persuade the institution to fundamentally change itself. And it kind of made sense just to give the institution a bit of kudos. It kind of makes sense that they couldn't, because you need the whole market to change. So it wouldn't make sense for one player to change on their own. So anyway, I kind of got frustrated with that and left for retired basically, and then found this thing. So that's basically how I got interested in it. My background's engineering and all of this sort of stuff. So like all of the inner workings around the cryptography and the economic incentive models and all of that, I just found intellectually very stimulating.
Because a lot of people now, they see what's happened recently with, obviously, in the States, there's been a few scandals recently. Like, how do you kind of keep your own knowledge up to date all the time to make sure that you can see not necessarily see these things coming, but so you can tell who's credible and who isn't credible, and like which coins are a good investment or maybe have potential and which ones don't? Is it down to the engineering background? You can read the white papers underneath, or what kind of heuristics do you use?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not really involved in any of sort of the pure crypto stuff. So what we're doing is really traditional finance, but using blockchain technology to sort of make everything much more efficient, and all of that good stuff. I mean, for stuff like that, I wouldn't have known whether it was going to be FTX, but it was pretty clear all of these exchanges are highly centralized, and they're basically performing all of the functions that are performed by different players inside of in the financial world. So it doesn't shock me in the slightest that this thing happened. It was always going to happen, and it's kind of the traditional financial market has gone through all of this stuff many times and kind of got more and more regulated as a result. So you can just sort of see like, yeah, okay, the risks are all the same. Just because it's on blockchain doesn't change any of the risks. Some of them might be handled much better because of blockchain, but some of them, like lack of controls around operational processes, which is effectively at least part of the story as I can discern from FTX. That isn't anything to do with blockchain. That's just, poor management, essentially.
What I was wondering there is like, is there any contagion for you, or is it almost not necessarily a good thing, but when things like that happen, it shows the need for people to have these good relationships with the central banks and for that communication so that people actually know what's going on. So does it help you in some ways as well, where you're showing like, look, we're doing everything above the board. You've got the process in place. You've got the banks backing you. Does it help in some ways as well because you can show yourselves to be different?
Yeah. I mean, so I think the FTX thing and before that the Luna thing are both bad and good, and they're bad and good for different reasons, right? They're bad because in general, there's many people that will go like, oh yeah, I always knew that that blockchain stuff was rubbish, and this kind of proves my worldview and blah 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 blah. But they're also good because there are clearly some parts of the the existing crypto world that are need improvement, and this is I know if I was in the crypto world I probably wouldn't think this, but getting regulated is kind of par for the course. When you're dealing with people's money, they want it kind of looked after, etc. So it's kind of good because it's showing the market like you do need all of that stuff, and for the players like me that have been pursuing that path at great expense, it's a sort of a bit of validation that we're going down the right path, and it's really that's the right place for it. So I think it's kind of it's good and bad. It makes naysayers more naysayery, and but it does make some of the conversations much, for the people in the middle that really think there may be something good with it. It makes it much better.
Yeah, and then like with the organization you're building as well. So obviously you said you've got about 100 employees now. How much of that has been like trying to work out who to bring on board to this project? Because like I said, it is very different to a lot of other projects out there. How have you been making those hiring decisions to bring on board the right people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a So one thing is, we're obviously I didn't say it when you asked me about the vision thing, but we're quite a vision-driven organization. So I didn't even answer the question around what makes me passionate about this. And there's two things that basically make me passionate around it. So one thing is there are the financial system kind of works, and it works pretty well, but it's not as secure and as good as it could be for society, right? You can see that in all of the events. We don't have to go to Luna and FTX or crypto things, but before that there was the whole Robinhood stuff where people want to trade more frequently, and there's all sorts of margin calls, and it causes all kinds of ruptions in the market. It's not good. We can make all of that stuff better. So for me, it's partly about getting society the kind of settlement infrastructure that technology is capable of delivering today, like something new that will really improve it by lowering risk and hopefully making more money available for people to do the things they want to do. The second part that really interests me is not about blockchain at all. It's actually about the type of company and our company values and what we want to be and so on. And the big thing for me is around teamwork and working with a bunch of people that can rely on each other and trust each other and so on, and are kind of empowered to make decisions, sort of take the company forward. The reason for doing all of that is I think it will lead to a better outcome for the overall company and deliver faster. So we actually, when we interview, we're not so heavy on particular technical capabilities, whether it's technology itself or law. We hire lawyers, we hire product managers, we like all of that sort of stuff. Although we really want them to be kind of the top quartile of the people that are doing all of that. We focus very heavily on the cultural aspects. So we do at least two kind of cultural type interviews. So one's a social interview and one's like a values interview to make sure they're going to be a good fit in we've got quite an unusual setup, so it takes some getting used to. Like there is no boss to tell you what to do. There's like a list of priorities that come down, and then you pick up from the backlog the thing that you can work on and get on with it, right? And then coordinate with everybody else. I mean, it's a bit more sophisticated than that, but that's essentially what's going on.
Like, has there been any like growing pains with like trying to do that, implement that different system? Like, what lessons have you learned along the way so far?
First of all, I don't think there's any system in the world that works, perfectly, right? Because otherwise everybody would be doing it. So, traditional corporations work, but I don't think anyone that works in them would say they work perfectly, because there's always some, there's always some kind of issue, endless meetings, decisions don't get made fast enough. Decisions are the wrong decisions because they don't have enough information. Or I can't get this thing done because I can't get the resource I want because it can't be prioritized for, whatever. Whatever the thing is, it works, but it's not perfect. Our thing also works pretty well and solves some of those problems, but has its own problems of people can get lost. And what happens if somebody doesn't complete the task they said they were going to do on time? Obviously we want to make people accountable, but like there may be genuine reasons they can't. And like, how do we know? Like all of these types of things. And then there's the classic thing of like, I'm working really hard, but is that person really working really hard? I don't know. So there's all of these emotions kind of in the organization. I don't think we'll ever arrive at a right answer. We're kind of steering in a particular direction and philosophy.
And obviously a lot of this company has been during the pandemic as well, right? And how did that affect you in like the company's growth? Because obviously you've mentioned before you like working from home yourself sometimes as well.
Yeah, actually, before the pandemic, we had a nice big office and everyone was in the office and working, like normal. But actually, we were pretty easily able to switch to remote first because of our kind of decentralized nature and the team structure and all of this sort of stuff. And because there aren't really any managers, there was nobody complaining they couldn't see what XYZ was doing. So the whole remote first thing worked out pretty well, actually. I'd say for the company. It was definitely stressful, as it was for everyone in the first few months, because we were getting used to it. I think now we've got a situation where we've got an office for 30 odd people, so we could never take the whole company in one go. But actually, it's generally about 3/4 full. So there's a small group of people that like to be in the office every day. There's some other people more like me that will come in every so often and maybe not be there for the whole day. And then there's other people that are like, I don't need to go into the office at all. So they might come in. We do an all company day, like once every 3 months.
You mentioned as well that there's no managers, and obviously your ambitions are to grow this so it becomes a global company. Do you think at some point you're going to need to try to bring in these managers, or do you hope that this will scale, like as your company keeps growing, you can keep this system going?
We have a belief that we can scale it, but we're not big enough to have tried out the scaling methodology. So a lot of what we're doing kind of mimics aspects of what Spotify did with their whole tribe guild, that kind of that kind of setup. And they've managed to, I've never worked at Spotify, so I have no idea how well it works, but it appears that they've managed to scale pretty well. So I think we can kind of do it. The way that I think about it is there's basically 3 things that a manager typically does, or should do. One is, what is the, kind of give a vision and like what's or direction for the team, so they all kind of know where they're going and what the outcome they're trying to deliver to is. The second thing is some sort of guardrails for delivery, like, whether it's have you done it, to how do I help you unblock XYZ of whatever it is that you're working on, and here's the system that within which we're working. And then the third thing is kind of what I call pastoral care. What am I doing with my career? How do I get my pension done? All of this kind of, I guess pension's more like HR, but sort of all of that sort of stuff. What we've done basically is empower that stuff into the organization. So the vision thing really comes from the product managers, and the product managers get their vision from the company's overall vision. So they develop their products based on the company's overall vision. So they build their roadmaps, and that gives kind of the guidance of where they want to go. We kind of use, to some extent, Scrum Masters, but basically data to show, are people within the guide rails? Are they doing the stuff? Where are we going to be? All of that. What do you need unblocked? Who can help you? All of that kind of thing. Although we've used Scrum Masters for the, kind of that stuff, but actually we're finding that teams themselves can, as you make it more and more data driven, can handle it themselves. So you need the Scrum Masters less and less. And then the last part is all of that pastoral care type stuff. And actually we put a HR or talent person in each of the teams to help coordinate with kind of all of that sort of stuff. So that's basically the way that we drive it. So you could say there's 3 extra people in there, but not really, because those people would have existed even in a kind of traditional type thing. Just remove the need for these other type managers. The benefit is, if you like, for me, I could have been a manager, but I also know a lot. I've got a lot of content knowledge, and the benefit is we can hire more experienced people that have a lot of knowledge and not impose management on them, but allow them to focus purely on providing the intellectual input into whatever it is we're doing. So kind of ramp up our ability to deliver based on that.
So what do you enjoy most about your own role that you're doing at the moment?
There's a few things I quite like about it. So I definitely like the sort of talking to the market in general and telling them about what we're doing and trying to persuade the market this is the way to go. So I like that outward facing part of it. Me personally, I also like tinkering with the system of how the organization works, see if we can get it to be more efficient and kind of joining the dots. In a way, there's a limited number of people that can join the dots between all the different pieces that we're putting together. So I kind of enjoy that part of it. And then kind of I guess the other part is like kind of whatever the company needs to be successful. I guess some of that's less exciting than other other bits. But I like helping people with their kind of personal goals and so on. So yeah.
And like obviously you were retired before and you've been going in this role and you're enjoying it. What's some of the stuff that you haven't necessarily done yet, but you're really excited to do in the future?
I think I mean let me talk about the company first. So right now our challenge is, can we get these get regulated by the central banks and get these accounts opened by the central banks? For me, the most exciting part of the journey, well, actually, that has been an exciting part of the journey because when we started, nobody thought it was possible. And now we're kind of proving it's possible. I think the next most exciting part of the journey is going to be around, okay, can we come up with some clever business model that enables us to obviously generate money, but also suck in all of the participants to create kind of some sort of network effect. And, we're probably going to go through like 3 or 4 iterations of things that don't work until we find the thing that does work. But that whole business angle, I think, is going to be fascinating.
So obviously at the moment, all your clients are banks. And for the average business or the average customer, how would like what you're doing for the banks filter through to them?
Well, I mean, look, if you're paying inside of a particular jurisdiction or country or whatever, probably things work sort of basically okay. You kind of occasionally get irritated about treasury management. So like, do I have enough funds to pay it? And can't the bank just do that? But you basically effectively take out an overdraft and that all kind of gets dealt with. I think when it comes to cross-border or more complex payments, the service that people get more spotty, basically. And so, can we make all of that? If you're talking about a regular corporate, will it filter through to them in a way that makes all of that much more efficient? So what I'm thinking is, will people be able to manage their treasury, so basically their cash balances and so on, much more efficiently, so they can operate with less working capital, which means they can optimize their profits and so on. But the man on the street, I think, we're not really. I doubt any of the stuff we're doing will ever filter down to them directly. It will obviously filter down indirectly. Well, it might not, because of course the companies might all keep all the money that they're saving from doing all of this stuff. But there's a question about whether it will filter down from kind of companies and the banks themselves being able to do stuff more efficiently and much more safely.
I think anybody who's tried to so a lot of my income comes from like America or comes from other countries. And it's always such a pain. Like when you're using PayPal, when you're using Stripe, whatever you're using, there's always different things that just make it more difficult than it feels like it needs to be. And also that's the legacy systems, right? Where they're built in that way and it's very difficult for the banks to do anything about it. So is that where your kind of software would then come in and make that a lot easier?
So 100%, that's exactly one of the areas. Actually, so the G20, probably no one on this call listening to this podcast knows this, but the G20 basically decided to prioritize making cross-border payments much cheaper and more efficient and a whole bunch of other things. And they commissioned a bunch of regulators, basically, and other market participants to figure out how they were going to drive that agenda over the next, half dozen years. We are actually part of that whole program because what we're doing, there's 19 different things that could be done to make it much more efficient. And at least 3 of them, that are pretty fundamental, we can really help with. So we're talking to the central banks about all of that sort of stuff. And hopefully we'll be able to bring some of those benefits to cross-border. So cross-border is a bit of a nightmare, no matter who you are, right? Because it takes a long time. You don't know where your money is. It's gone out of your account, but it hasn't landed at the other place. It's not good, basically.
Yeah, and obviously with your clients, because it's the banks that people are already using anyway, it makes it simpler, right? Because at the moment people have to use these other services. So it's almost you're giving me the magic that's working in the background, rather than me having to go to, I won't name companies, but it's obviously these companies you go and you have to make a separate account with that you then upload your give them your money, then you then transfer that with a good exchange rate. And there's so many extra steps in the process. Whereas if my bank did it because the underlying software or the underlying protocol underneath was a lot better, then it just makes everybody's lives easier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. So, and I mean, in a way, there's nothing to stop them doing what some of these other companies are offering you right now. But because all of their systems so what's the right word for it? Like legacy, they find it hard to produce kind of modern software that delivers on the client experience, etc. But with a catalyst like what we're doing at the back, they can start to rebuild some of that stuff so it's much more user friendly, and then the back end can actually provide the service that's actually kind of what's promised on the front end.
Even looking more widely at the blockchain world, what are some of the things that you think are really exciting that are happening right now, or you think are going to be in 10 years' time, could really make a difference to the average person's life?
So I don't know whether any of the companies that are doing it will be the right companies, but I definitely think there are several examples of stuff that's happening in the DeFi space that are super interesting and really quite exciting. So I think all of the stuff around automated lending, where basically there's some criteria, and the kind of the DeFi protocols will just lend you money for a certain amount of collateral, etc. You can argue about whether it's such a good thing in the crypto space or whatever, but the thinking behind that is really pretty awesome, I would say. And then the other thing is all the stuff around constant product market makers. So basically having a market maker function that's basically a mathematical model, I think is pretty fascinating as well. And the reason I say that actually is in my past life, I was actually basically running electronic trading at my previous financial institution. And we basically did robot-based trading and all of that sort of stuff. When you're making prices, the thing between the bid and offer is called the liquidity spread. And the question is, what's the size of that liquidity spread? You'd use the market to find it out. You'd make it as wide as possible, and then you shrink down until you found the price at which the market would pay you, and that would give you the direction, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that's really interesting about this constant product market maker stuff is it actually directly prices liquidity in. It's like in part of the mathematical model. So the trader part of my brain is thinking wow, it has ramifications far beyond just there's no people involved in trading. So I'm quite excited about that as well. And then in the kind of the wholesale space, because of what we're doing, I have a belief that we're going to move to either real time or very near real time everything in financial market settlement, and that's going to create new markets. And part of those new markets are intraday markets. So somebody will do 8 a.m. versus 9 a.m. liquidity swaps, 1 hour liquidity swaps and all this sort of stuff to kind of get their liquidity in the right place. There's a platform out there called Fintium that's kind of doing this in FX. I think those sorts of companies, that are looking at where the market's going, are going to do, will do pretty well. Like this stuff that we're doing around digital markets, digital, kind of, when I say digital, I mean like blockchain based, is really going to change things, and there will be many new opportunities opened up, many new ways to both to benefit society and to make money. So I'm quite excited about that.
So I feel like the entrepreneurs listening who are thinking, they understand the blockchain, but they're not sure how to best find the opportunities where potentially they can make a difference. What advice would you give them to try to spot those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, the wrap on blockchain historically has been it's a solution looking for a problem. So a little bit the way you're asking the question is it's a little bit of there's a solution, go and find the problem. For me, for the entrepreneur thing, don't worry about what the solution is. Find the problems that you're interested in fixing, and then the solutions. You'll try some solutions, and hopefully some of them work, but probably the first few won't work, and then you'll find other solutions that do work. I mean, my story is a little bit unusual because I kind of got lucky in the sense of there was this thing that I was already working on that was really interesting, and then it was just a question of, do I want to? Am I going to put the energy in to make it real? I got lucky. I think if you're genuine entrepreneur, where you really know you want to be run your own business and all of that, I think it's much more about find the problem.
What are some problems that you think exist at the moment that people should be solving with the blockchain? Well, potentially solving with the blockchain that you wish somebody would solve?
That is a good question to answer. I actually think there may be some problems in healthcare and all of this stuff that blockchain could. There's an overall problem that everyone's knows pretty well around identity. And I think an extension of that identity thing would be into actually healthcare. And now that I'm talking about it, I think insurance probably could have, there's a whole bunch of problems in insurance. And I'm pretty sure blockchain could be a good solution for some of them. Having said all of that, I'm not an expert in either field, so probably I'm wrong. Somebody would actually have to go do the work and figure it out.
So it's been really interesting to talk to you today. Like if people want to find out more about Fnality or more about you, where should they go to?
Yeah. So we have a website. It's fnality.org. Actually, we have a whole bunch of papers and articles about what we're, kind of what we're doing there. So yeah, feel free to go to the website.
And what I'd like to give people as well is the opportunity to shout out like entrepreneurs that they know or they've worked with, who they believe are doing great things that maybe people should be following too.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we've got a bunch of partner companies, but I've probably given a special shout out to a company called FNA, Financial Network Analytics. They're run by a guy named Kimo Samaraki, and they are basically a data analytics for blockchain type company. They're doing an amazing job. They've got some super clever people. I think they're basically doing kind of, I guess you'd call it supervisor tech or reg tech or something like this. Really amazing. They've helped us with all of our liquidity modeling, to show how the market would evolve when you have a system like ours in place. A second company that I'd shout out is a company called Adara. They're run by a triumvirate, Julio Farah, Edward Budd, and Peter Munnings. They basically are our blockchain partner. So they are developing all of the underlying protocols for us. But that's not actually the company they run. The company they run is actually is creating blockchain-based liquidity tooling for banks and other financial institutions. And I think they're doing an amazing job getting the message out there and creating a vision and all of that sort of stuff. I guess the last company I'd like to shout out is a very small company. I kind of mentioned them earlier. It's a company called Fintium. And this is a company that's far ahead of its time. So they're looking at intraday liquidity swaps. The guy that's running it is called Brian, and now his last name's escaped me. So Brian, you'll have to forgive me, but the company name is Fintium. Essentially, what they're looking at is how they can provide intraday liquidity markets for banks. What I love about them is the vision and the kind of sticking power to something that's like some way into the future.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks a lot.